Okay, boys and girls. So, this is the second video on the reproductive system. And so, uh, today, or in this video anyway, we're going to talk about the male anatomy. Okay. So, this is obviously a lateral view of the male anatomy. And I just want to point out the various organs so that you know what we're talking about as we get a little bit further into the details on how all of this works. So we start with the scrotum, which is a sac, held on the outside of the body, and it's essentially here. And inside that sac are contained two testes, and you can see the testis is this structure right here. um, the testes are where the sperm is formed, and eventually they will make their way once they've grown into this structure here, which is called the epididymis. This is where they are stored and where they do a little bit of maturation before they are ejaculated, if they are ejaculated. All right, any sperm that are not ejaculated will eventually be reabsorbed and broken down. Now, so that's the epididymis. Um, the route. I don't know why it keeps doing that. I'm sorry. Try this. The route out of the epididymis is through this long tube here, which is referred to as um, the vas deferens. Okay, the vas deferens, and there are two of these. All right, one on each side, one leading from each epididymis, and they come together. They converge right about here at the beginning of the next tube, which is the urethra. The urethra is the tube that leads through the penis and eventually to the outside of the body. And of course, the structure, the tube inside, or that the tube is inside of, is the penis itself. Now, there are also three glands that you should be aware of, and those glands are located in inside the body. And so there are three. All right. The first one is what we call the seminal vesicle, and that's located right here, the seminal vesicle. Okay. The second one is the prostate gland, which is here. This is the essentially the location where the two vas deferens come together to join and meet the urethra. And then finally, this teeny weeny little gland here is called the bulbourethral gland. We'll talk about their functions in a few minutes. Okay. All right. So what happens inside the scrotum and the testes? Well, the scrotum is simply a sac that holds the testes, and they help to regulate the temperature of the testes. In the last video, we talked about possible causes of infertility, and in men, mostly it's because of a low sperm count. Well, if the temperature of the testes is too high, possibly because they are held too close to the body and absorb that warmth, then that could lead to infertility. And so the scrotum is essentially a sac that allows the testes to be held outside the body in a cooler location. If, on the other hand, the testes get too cold, they can migrate back into the body. Any of you who are Seinfeld fans and remember George Costanza talking about shrinkage, he was in the pool. All right, if you remember, you'll be laughing right now. If you don't remember, well, then we'll just move on. In any event, the testes themselves are a pair of organs, glands, that produce not only sperm, but also male sex hormones. Um, they are composed of a bunch of what we call seminiferous tubules where the sperm are actually produced. And I'll show you a picture of what that looks like in just a moment. And then finally, there is the epididymis, which is a structure that sits on top of each of the two testes, and the sperm are stored here, and they do a little bit of maturing in that location. Now, this, as you can see over here, these things are the seminiferous tubules. And you can see them kind of squiggly in here. And again, they're squiggly because that increases the dun, 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 surface area so that more sperm can be produced. The slide that you see is a cross section of a seminiferous tubule, and if you look carefully, these things in here are actually the tails of various sperm cells. Their heads are buried in this ring that you see here, and then there are Sertoli cells or support cells that actually help to nourish the sperm. They essentially feed them. Now, I do want to point out that this is a stained slide. Your sperm and your Sertoli cells are not blue unless you're a Smurf. Okay, this is stained so that the image pops out of the screen. So the sperm are produced inside the seminiferous tubules, and then they make their way up into the epididymis, this large structure here. Eventually, they will leave the epididymis through this long tube that leads up and out, and that's the vas deferens. So let's talk about sperm themselves. What are they composed of, and what do they contain? Well, all sperm consist of three parts. Okay, you've got the head, and while arguably the most important thing that the head contains is the DNA, the 23 chromosomes that the father is going to contribute to the zygote, the head is itself covered with a cap called an acrosome. And the acrosome contains enzymes that actually help to break through the outer defenses of the egg. At the end, the enzymes literally digest their way into the egg. The middle piece, which is right here, this part, sometimes referred to as the neck. That says neck if you can't read it. This contains a lot of mitochondria. Now, why do we have mitochondria? Because we need energy. Why do we need energy? Because the sperm have a long way to swim in order to fulfill their destiny. All right. What happens here is that the mitochondria are generating a great deal of energy, which causes the tail, this long, thin piece here, to spin. And it actually spins like a propeller. All right, not like a snake. It's not doing a fishtail or a snaky kind of movement, but rather a spinning motion like a propeller. And that propels the sperm through not only the insides of the male anatomy, but also through the insides of the female anatomy. All right, so the head, the middle piece or neck, and the tail are the three pieces of sperm, the parts of the sperm. Now, Okay, so the tubes that lead through the male system from the testes essentially to the outside are called the vas deferens and the urethra. Now, the vas deferens lead from each of the two epididymi into the prostate gland, where they come together and form a single tunnel tube called the urethra. And the urethra leads all the way through the penis and eventually out of the body. However, what's important in this slide is the fact that we have three different glands. The seminal vesicle. Don't know why that does that. I really don't. I'm going to keep my hands folded. The seminal vesicles, and these are there because they produce a sugary fluid. Now, Why do we need sugar? Well, what's the fuel that mitochondria use in order to uh, uh, produce ATP? Well, that fuel is sugar. And so the seminal vesicles are providing sugar to the sperm so that their mitochondria can produce ATP to propel them along. The prostate gland produces an alkaline fluid. Now, here's the thing. The uh, the environment inside the vagina is very inhospitable to anything that doesn't really belong there. All right, it's very acidic, and that's by design. You want that as one of the first lines of defense in your immune system, right? You want to keep out bacteria and yeast and all sorts of other things, anything that doesn't really belong there. But unfortunately, that acidic environment also would kill sperm. And so therefore, the sperm need to have a basic or alkaline fluid that will help to buffer that pH and bring it closer to neutral in order to so that they can survive in the vagina and make their way up into the uterus and oviducts for fertilization. Last but not least are the bulbourethral glands. And these produce a mucus that acts as a lubricant through the male urethra to allow the sperm to flow out of the penis during ejaculation. Okay. Now, this picture always makes my male students exceptionally uncomfortable. To see a flayed penis like this on a diagram just makes almost every male student want to cross their legs. And I'd be laughing at you right now if we were in class, because I would immediately have seen several of you cross your legs and kind of look uncomfortable. But in any event, the penis is the organ in males used for sexual intercourse and in males for urination. The urethra is the tube that leads through it, and both urine and semen exit the body through the urethra. Now, the glans penis is the very tip of the penis here, and at birth, anyway, it's covered by a foreskin. Now, most people these days, most males these days, are circumcised. Meaning that the foreskin is removed very early on during life. I had my boys, circumcised right before they came home from the hospital. So my son Jack was about a month old. My son Steven was almost 4 months old when they had it done. But most babies have this done, most male babies have this done when they're just a couple of days old, right before they come home from the hospital. And it really is a very good thing to do for your sons, all right? Males who are not circumcised run the risk for all sorts of infections and other difficulties. I will tell you that my own father and my father-in-law had to be either circumcised or recircumcised in adulthood. And for a 26 to 30-year-old man to be recircumcised, that's a hell of a different experience than it is for a day-old young man, a day-old infant. All right, an infant doesn't remember being circumcised, and a 26-year-old is going to remember. So, last thing on this slide, the erectile dysfunction or impotency occurs when the erectile tissue does not expand enough to compress the veins. Notice all the blood vessels that are up here. All right, when the penis becomes erect, this is because there are valves that close off and prevent the veins from allowing blood to leave. And so during erectile dysfunction, or if you have erectile dysfunctions, those the veins are allowing the blood out, or possibly not enough blood is coming in order to hold the penis in the erect position. And so, obviously there are all sorts of TV ads these days advertising drugs that will help this process and so on. But that's what erectile dysfunction is. It really is a circulatory system disorder. Okay. Last thing that I want to talk about here is hormonal circulation, hormonal regulation in males. Most people are aware that there's a hormonal cycle in females, but they're not as aware of the same kind of cycle in males. It's not really a cycle, but there are regulatory hormones here. The first is GnRH, or gonadotropin-releasing hormone. And this is secreted by the hypothalamus just below the brain, and it controls the release of other hormones, including the follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. Now,
it's 3 o'clock.
Oh, thank you, Jesus. I want you to, why is this? Oh, I don't have a pen. There you go. I want you to keep track of this hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, because males don't have follicles, but it does help to promote the production of sperm. There's also luteinizing hormone, and I want you to keep that one in mind for the next video as well, because although it does control the production of testosterone, it's not. It's generally what we would consider a female hormone. FSH and LH are female hormones, quote unquote. And finally, one that I'm sure most of you have heard of is testosterone. And this is the hormone that's responsible for the development of secondary sex characteristics in young men. It is also important for the functioning of male reproductive organs. All right. So that, my friends, concludes our discussion of the reproductive system in males. If you have any questions or anything else, let me know. But stay tuned for the third and final video in this series on the reproductive system in humans.